My wife cheated on me and wanted a divorce, demanding half of everything. I remained calm and accepted. Without her knowing, all my assets were in my father's name. This happened a few years ago. When I met Claudia, she was beautiful, charming, and captivated me with her contagious laughter. We got married quickly, perhaps too quickly. And for a while, everything seemed perfect. Or so I thought. From the beginning, my father had advised me to be careful with my assets. SOS/EOS. We come from a hardworking family that had managed to amass a good fortune over the years. My father was always very shrewd in business and instilled in me the importance of protecting what we had built. So, following his advice, everything I had from the house we lived in to the cars and the bank accounts was in his name. All this without Claudia knowing. At first, I had no reason to distrust her. She was my wife, the woman I planned to spend the rest of my life with. But over time, things began to change. Claudia started spending more time away from home, always with the excuse of being busy with work or out with friends. What really sparked my suspicions was when she started showing too much interest in our finances. She began asking me exactly how much I earned, how much things cost, and if we had insurance in case of emergencies. One day, I decided to follow her after she told me she was going to a work meeting. It turned out that the meeting was at the most expensive restaurant in the city. But she wasn't alone. I saw her having dinner with another man, laughing and being much more affectionate than she had been with me in months. My heart broke into 1,000 pieces at that moment, but I didn't let anger blind me. I knew that if I acted impulsively, I could lose everything. Instead of confronting her immediately, I began gathering evidence. I hired a private investigator to follow Claudia and confirm my suspicions. For weeks, he sent me photos and videos of the two together, holding hands, kissing, and going into hotels. It was evident that Claudia was cheating on me. And the worst part was that she didn't seem to care if I found out or not. Finally, the day that would change everything arrived. One night, when I came home from work, Claudia was waiting for me in the living room. She had that cold, calculating look that I had already learned to recognize. She told me that she was no longer happy in our marriage, that she had met someone else, and that she wanted a divorce. But not only that, she also wanted half of everything. I remember how my stomach turned when she said that. I knew she wasn't asking out of need, but out of greed and spite. She was convinced that she would take a large part of my money and property, believing it belonged to her. But what Claudia didn't know was that everything she wanted wasn't really in my name. I decided to go along with it without showing any emotion and simply accepted the divorce. I told her that, of course, there was no problem and that we would resolve everything as soon as possible. What she didn't know was that I had a plan up my sleeve, one that I would put into action as soon as we signed the papers. When we finally met in court to sign the divorce papers, I kept the most serene expression possible, even knowing the storm that was unfolding on Claudia's side. She arrived, accompanied by a lawyer who seemed more interested in earning a big commission than in resolving anything. She already had that victorious look, that side smile that said, "I'm going to ruin you." Little did she know that the real blow was yet to come. We sat down, signed some documents, and her lawyer soon demanded an inventory of assets. He began listing what he believed to be a fortune. First, the house we lived in, an enormous house located in an upscale neighborhood that Claudia must have already imagined selling for an outrageous sum. Then the luxury cars, followed by the full bank accounts. Claudia looked on with an air of superiority as the details were mentioned. Then I asked my lawyer to hand over the ownership documents. Claudia's lawyer received them, and as he began to read, I saw her expression gradually change. The confident, smug demeanor was replaced by something different. First, a slight wrinkle of doubt on her forehead, then a heavy breath, until her gaze became a mix of shock and despair. She turned to the lawyer and whispered something, probably trying to understand what was happening. I remained calm. Everything we had, from the house to the cars and the accounts, was in my father's name. Legally, I did not own anything of value under my name. Claudia, who had walked in there believing she would leave with half of everything, was now realizing that there was nothing to divide. Nothing she thought she could take was actually mine. But it didn't end there. The lawyer looked at Claudia and said, somewhat awkwardly. In that case, we need to discuss the division of Mrs. Claudia's assets. Her expression was pure disbelief. She had believed herself to be untouchable and that she would leave victorious. But the game had turned in a way she never expected. Claudia, over the years, had accumulated her own assets because she never thought to hide or protect her wealth as I had. She had an apartment in her name, a luxury car, and some bank accounts. Once it became clear that my assets couldn't be touched, Claudia suddenly found herself in a terrible position. She had more wealth than I did and would therefore have to divide her assets with me. I watched her expression change completely. The victorious smile disappeared and was replaced by panic. She started arguing with her lawyer, trying to find a way out of the situation, but it was impossible. Legally, I was entitled to half of everything in her name. Ironic, wasn't it? She came after half of everything she thought belonged to me, and now she was the one who had to divide what she had with me. At the end of the process, I walked out of there with half of Claudia's apartment, half of her car, and a considerable portion of her bank accounts. Each signature she gave on the papers was accompanied by a bitter expression and a stifled tear. I was calm the entire time, almost impassive, while she showed the growing fury of seeing her plan fall apart. After everything was finalized, Claudia tried to approach me, questioning how I could do this to her. Me? Do this to you? I responded, almost laughing at the hypocrisy. You wanted to destroy me, Claudia. You came after what wasn't yours, believing you could get away with it. And look where we are now. You wanted half of everything, and now I'm the one walking away with half of what is yours. She yelled, tried to make a scene, but the courtroom was a cold and indifferent place. No one was interested in her drama. I shrugged and left, leaving her there, standing, trying to piece together what was left of her life. The Claudia who had entered the courtroom full of confidence was now just a shadow, a person who had lost everything because of her own greed. Eventually, I found out that Claudia had to sell the apartment to pay off debts that had come up. Without the money she thought she would get from me, she ended up getting into debt trying to maintain the luxurious lifestyle we had. She tried to keep the car, but the cost was too high. In the end, she was left with little more than the clothes on her back, while I moved on, with my share securely in hand. Ironic how she, who came after my ruin, ended up ruining herself. After the court, I thought things would finally settle down and that we would both move on with our lives. But Claudia couldn't accept defeat. Instead of dealing with the situation and moving forward, she decided to try to defame me. She started posting on social media, telling her version of the story, in which I was the big villain who had manipulated, betrayed, and financially ruined her. She painted herself as the perfect victim, a wife who had been deceived by a cruel husband. She used the harshest and most dramatic words possible and managed to gain some sympathy at first. Many people who followed her, unaware of the details, began attacking me online, calling me a coward, selfish, and other insults. My friends alerted me to what she was doing, and when I saw the posts, I decided I wasn't going to let it slide. She wanted to play in the public arena, so I would too. I gathered all the evidence I had. The photos from the private investigator, the messages, the court details, and even records of her attempt to take half of what she thought was mine. I made a long post explaining the entire story. I went straight to the point, no exaggerations, just the facts. I showed how Claudia had planned to betray me and then try to financially ruin me out of sheer greed. I made it clear that while she was planning the betrayal and the separation, I was protecting my assets because it was something my family had built through hard work. As soon as my response started circulating, the tide turned against her. People who had previously sided with Claudia were now shocked by the truth. Comments began to appear on her posts, calling her manipulative and pointing out how she had underestimated the situation and me. The image Claudia tried to create of herself as the victim began to crumble. She went from being an aggrieved wife to someone trying to pull a con and ended up exposed. The pressure on social media became unbearable for her. Claudia, full of shame, tried to delete the posts, but it was too late. Screenshots were circulating, and people continued to comment. It didn't take long before she deactivated all her accounts, completely disappearing from the radar. She had no way to justify herself anymore, and every attempt at a response only made things worse for her. In the midst of all this chaos, something unexpected happened. Claudia's best friend, Marcella, reached out to me. She wanted to understand what had really happened, said she couldn't believe everything she was seeing and hearing. We arranged to meet up to talk and clarify things. At the meeting, Marcella was very attentive. I told her everything, from how Claudia began acting suspiciously to the evidence I had gathered. Marcella seemed sad and disappointed about what she had learned about her friend, but at the same time, she couldn't hide the fact that she agreed with me. She said that I had done the right thing, that no one deserved to go through what I went through. As the conversation continued, Marcella really began to comfort me. She told me that I was a good person, that I didn't deserve what Claudia had done to me, and that it was admirable how I had kept calm and moved on without giving in to blind hatred or revenge. There was something about her, an understanding and kindness that I hadn't expected. As time went on, the atmosphere between us changed. The conversation became more personal, closer. Marcella began to flirt with me, and it didn't take long before we ended up being together. It happened naturally, as if all the tension of those past months needed an outlet, and Marcella was there by my side when I needed it most. It wasn't something I intended to make public, especially to Claudia. She and I haven't spoken since all this happened, and I don't see any reason to change that. My life moved forward, and somehow, being with Marcella felt like a new beginning. While Claudia's attempt at revenge completely failed and she withdrew humiliated, my own revenge, if I can call it that, worked. I moved on, secure and now happier, while she had to deal with the consequences of her own actions. Marcella and I keep everything between us without making a fuss. What matters is that I am finally free of Claudia and her manipulations, while she, because of her own greed and poorly calculated actions, ended up alone, without the assets and without the support she expected. Justice, after all, was done, even if in a way no one anticipated.